troops have a lot of mercenaries over there. They never say how many of those mercenaries are over there. They say, oh, we have 70,000 troops. When they say 70,000 troops, do they mean 70,000 troops plus the mercenaries?
In Afghanistan, we have 60-something thousand troops with another 12,000 going or support troops, non-combat troops. And then we have the mercenaries. And the Department of Defense contractors are 75,000 or so. Only 15-20% of those are mercenaries. The others are support, the people who cook the meals and wash the clothes and so on. But then there's the mercenaries who work for the State Department and the other branches. And I don't know what all the figures are, but we certainly have far more contractors in Afghanistan than troops. And a big chunk of them are mercenaries. And these are people who are doing far more damage than good, who are turning the people of Afghanistan radically against the United States.
Is there any way to get the MSNBC or I know that Fox is going to report it, but to get them to start telling the public that, well, we've got 70,000 troops, but we also have, 45,000, paid mercenaries, and this is what we're paying them, because this is costing an enormous amount of money.
There is. It's not that they've completely ignored it, but they don't talk about it enough. And every time that they throw these figures out, they flush it. And every time that they throw out the casualty figures, they flush it. They leave the mercenaries out of the casualty figures, so those look lower, which is one benefit to the war machine. The mercenaries. By all means, we should lobby the big corporate media outlets to say what needs to be said, but we shouldn't leave it at that. We should work with the good media outlets that are interested in saying what needs to be said and making our own media outlets. And there are now radio shows and internet sites that are approaching the viewership of these corporate media outlets that we're always so focused on, but don't care about us. And so I would not leave out that part of it, because there are good reporters and good hosts who do want to talk about these things.
Then, about the public option and healthcare reform, I was reading that on the healthcare reform, Obama has said that, well, if you like your health insurance that you currently have, you won't lose it. You don't have to change it. But the other part of that is that if, let's say, you're working for a company and they offer really terrible health care, you're paying a lot of money for nothing, no insurance, you don't have the option to go to public option.
Right.
Nice. And then the other thing is that they're only making companies that have a payroll of over $500,000 actually provide health care if they're not already providing it. Well, what's that, 10 to 15 companies, maybe 20 companies in the United States? I mean...
How many people love their insurance company? Raise your hand if you like your health insurance company.
How many people have it?
How many people have some form of health insurance? Raise your hand. So, most people, more people here than nationally, have got health insurance of some form, although watch out because it's no good if you actually need it. And nobody likes their health insurance company, and nobody ever did. In fact, health insurance companies are less popular than politicians, lawyers, car salesmen, journalists. I mean, nobody likes them. And so all of this nonsense about if you're afraid to lose your health insurance company and be given universal free comprehensive coverage, and that would terrify you, and rest assured, you can continue to get screwed by us. And, this is the nonsense you say when you can't say, I took $20 million from these people,
Yes, David, could you share with us your first experience with civil disobedience where you ended up going to jail? Why, and how did it make you feel?
jail in our nation's capital, and they've always been rather staged, prearranged, mass civil resistance, where typically we get warned 3 times and then arrested. I've not been, randomly dragged out of a crowd, as some friends of mine have been. I mean, there's all different sorts of experiences. I've been to jail on Capitol Hill and congressional offices. I've been in jail at the White House. The first time may have been at the White House, and there's just hundreds of us, and we just make a statement and get arrested and go to jail. And, it's something that can call attention to things. And often I've gotten out of jail and then gotten lots of media interviews about it that I wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't gone to jail, But I didn't want to go to jail. I wanted to be able to establish the right of free speech in front of the White House, And you have these, most of the police officers are sort of with us, and they'll take your arrest bush chain shirt and hide it in their pocket, and they're on your side, but they don't really want to think about what we're doing because they want to think that they're enforcing the law. They don't want to think that we're trying to enforce the law. And so they'll say, I'm just trying to be helpful, sir, step right this way. And he's, well, except for that arresting us bit, right? And it's like, well, wasn't that the point? Didn't you want to get arrested? No, I didn't want to get arrested. I'm here because over in Iraq. Oh, I know, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear about that stuff. I don't want to learn anything. And these are good people who have a job and want a paycheck, but they're enforcing things they should not be enforcing. There's not much risk if you get a lot of people, because I've risked arrest many more times than I've been arrested. If you have a lot of people, they don't want to arrest you because it's more work for them. And getting arrested is not frightening or disturbing or traumatic, usually, normally, in my experience. It's never been. And so, don't be afraid of it. Being afraid is our number one problem in this country. Anybody else have anything to say?
Yeah, I know you talked a lot about how Congress doesn't basically do their job. One of the things that hasn't been ruled on by the courts, there's a guy named Bob Schultz who has tried to get the federal government to rule on the First Amendment, which the last part of says you have the right to redress of grievances. At the federal level, you have the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, but there's no process for that. And no judge has ever said, okay, you get 10,000 signatures, you get in front of Congress, or just give us whatever input you feel on that area. Is there any way to get a process for that, in the next 10 years, one way or another? How would that work?
I think it's an excellent problem that I haven't thought very much about that needs work because, now we have a situation where the federal government can give itself immunity in court cases just by being the federal government. So the grievances is closed off. And it's very difficult for us to talk to our government. We end up in jail sometimes. That being said, there were a lot of local and state governments that passed petitions saying impeach Bush and submitted those petitions to the House of Representatives, and they became part of the formal record, but nobody did anything about it. And so the question is, if you figure out a way to address a grievance to the Congress or another part of the government, how do you enforce it? And can you use the courts to enforce a redress of grievances with the Congress? And if so, you're going to have to restore some rights to citizens and take away some rights that the government has bestowed upon itself at this point and bestowed upon corporations that it now treats as part of itself and treats as having all the rights given to flesh and blood human beings in the Constitution. And that's something that we may see a dramatic ruling on from the Supreme Court within the next month.
accept these vaccinations to be imprisoned at some of the hundreds of FEMA camps around. Are you familiar with the story of Jane Bergmeister, the Austrian journalist, and her complaint in the World Court against Obama, Kathleen Sebelius, and Janet Napolitano, head of Homeland Security?
No, I don't have any particularly good ideas, and I don't know that much about it. I know that there are places in the country where kids are being required to get vaccinations by local governments that are funded by the drug companies that make the vaccines, and it looks very, very corrupt. To what extent there are plans to pile people up in FEMA camps, I haven't seen the evidence of that. I'm not saying it's not true, but I can't comment on it. I haven't seen that.
But this whole plan has been brought forth by the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and it's been in place since June 11th, when in Category 6, which calls for martial law, forced vaccinations, and imprisonment, was initiated since June. If anybody would like to know about that, you can go to fluscam.com, and the whole story is right there. But you don't have any suggestion on how to stop it?
Well, similar suggestions to what I've made on anything else, and that is to educate, to use the media, to lead the media, and to resist politely and impolitely and forcefully, nonviolently, to not comply with something that we haven't put into effect through a legal and representative system that's being imposed on us. Don't comply.
Okay, well, speaking of fear, by the way, the flu mist, which they are now injecting into the nostrils of children, is live virus. And the story of Jane Bergmeister is that in Austria, they tested the vaccine going to 18 European countries and found live H1N1 virus, swine flu virus, live bird flu virus, and live Spanish virus that was recombinated by the Army Center for Biological Warfare. That was the 1918 virus that killed 30 million people worldwide. That was found live in the virus. That was going out to 18 countries, and lucky for all of us that when they injected a dozen terrorists, they all died within 3 days. Baxter International, who made this, which is an Illinois company, then first denied it, and then said it was a accidental contamination done in their Czechoslovakian plant, despite the fact that it's in Category 3, which is the highest category of safety. And the American media did nothing to publicize this, although there's quite a bit of publication in Europe. So that's some of the background. And again, you can find out this information because the more children that get inoculated, the more they're going to start to die. And then you'll see real fear in the United States. Because this is a plan that's been going on and planned for quite a while.
Okay, thanks.
Throughout the history of the United States, the executive power has often risen above civil liberties in times of conflict. For instance, Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War eliminated habeas corpus, FDR, forced Japanese American citizens to internment camps along the West Coast, and Richard Nixon allowed unwarranted seizures of homes and phone wiretaps in the Vietnam War. These actions are usually taken in order to so-called protect the American people. Ben Franklin once said that those who believe in giving up a little bit of civil liberties in order to ensure safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. What do you think of this argument?
Well, I think he's obviously right, and I think you're obviously right that wars that are primarily used to accumulate president is going to seize additional powers of any sort, and we aren't going to be able to stop it. There's a wonderful article today I read by a guy named William Polk, and he's a descendant of a guy named President Polk. And when Abraham Lincoln was in the Congress, President Polk was fighting an aggressive war against Mexico. And Abraham Lincoln moved towards impeachment of the president, denounced the lies of the sitting president, and said, if you claim that this war was started by the shedding of American blood, show me the spot where that blood was shed, and we'll believe you. And they moved resolutions against a sitting president because Abraham Lincoln was standing up for the power of the Congress. Then when he becomes president, he begins abusing power in the same way that previous presidents did. And you see this cycle throughout. But if you lose the idea that the Congress is supposed to push back in any way, right? I mean, the last time they really did was the Nixon example. And we got the War Powers Act, which was well defended, and we got the FISA bill that's now shredded. But Congress pushed back and forced Nixon out of town and forced some reforms and scared the next president or two a little bit. But now, what's different is not that presidents abuse power. What's different is that Congress doesn't push back in any way and cheers for the president. And half the members of Congress treat him as their leader because he's the head of their party, which is what they're loyal to. And the other half treat him as their leader because he's the emperor. And we have to get back to the idea that the people are going to have some body in our government that's going to push back against those abuses. And needless to say, when a president can declare an infinite war in all time and space against an emotion or a tactic, right, terror or terrorism, then presidents can strip any rights away at any time from here on out. And so we have to also get back to the idea that a time of war is a particular time in a particular place, and we have times of non-war. Right? We have, for some 18% of our history, not been at war anywhere in the world. Right? Yeah, I'd like to see it get up above 20% someday, maybe. And we can't do that if we have permanent war, during which we have exactly the danger you're describing permanently.
Thank you very much. The most impressive period of student and popular activism was probably in the 70s, or the 60s rather, culminating in civil rights marches and the RNC convention of 1968. The crucial reason behind this, I'd say, was probably the fact that the draft forced the citizenry to become involved, to be part of its country's foreign policies. Now we have a situation where there's less than 1% of the country that's involved in fighting this war, and formally, I guess, when we had a bigger presence in Iraq and now Afghanistan. So people don't really feel like they need to be conscious of what's going on, informed, because they're not really affected personally. What would you say? What would you, in the cause of eliminating or at least decreasing, citizen apathy? What would you say to bring back the draft?
Well, two things. First, I would say don't let people think they're not involved, because it is their money, and it is their rights, and it is their country where all the attention is being put and all the resources are being put into war instead of all the other things we needed. And it is their lifespans being shortened by the lack of health care, and it is their jobs being degraded by the lack of the right to unionize, and it is their lives, their environment being polluted, and so forth. Bringing back the draft would be a deterrent to wars. You couldn't simply bring it back. You have to do some other things first, right? The reason they don't have it now is that they don't need it, right? You have to get rid of the mercenaries. You have to get rid of much of the standing army as it exists. You have to get rid of the economic draft that they use to build an army so large that they don't need a standard draft. And then You have to enact some of the other broader reforms in order to have some control over our government, in order to create a draft that's fair, that actually includes the children of powerful people, right? And I would not be opposed to a draft that specifically included targeting the children of presidents and Congress members who vote for wars. I don't, not because I want them to go, but because then nobody's going to go. I would not be opposed to making war profiteering a major felony. I would not be opposed to putting the cost of war and the military on a separate line on income tax forms. I think, there are a wide range of reforms that we could use to deter wars. And a draft is a step in the right direction, but it has to be in combination with a bunch of other things. And I don't think it's the ideal. I think the ideal is further yet. I think the ideal is that you get rid of a standing army, that you have state militias that are volunteer, that militaries can be unionized, that militaries do not have their own systems of justice. They are accountable to the courts of our land, and that as in other militaries in other countries, you can opt out of a war you oppose. When we had volunteer militias, they were not very keen on fighting foreign wars for empire. And so we got a standing army. And I think the ideal vision down the road a piece is to get back to that point, which is much more like a draft, but in fact volunteering to do what in fact our servicemen and women agreed to in their contracts, and that is to defend this nation. But to have the choice to say, this has nothing to do with defending my nation, I'm not going to do it. As some young men and women are very bravely doing right now, and some of them going to jail for it, some of them saying under the principles of Nuremberg, I cannot obey an illegal order. I must disobey it. And they're court-martialed, and they're imprisoned, and they come out stronger, and they are heroes.
If there are no more questions, I'd just like to make a quick announcement that if you're interested in what we've discussed tonight, Reverend Bruce Wright, along with the ACI here at Eckerd College, will be starting a class the 28th of October, every Wednesday night for free. And we're going to be talking about local and global issues, such as the ones discussed tonight, and how we can take action and enforce what David's been talking about tonight. We'd like to thank you so much for